Are you the kind of person who has trouble waking up? The alarm goes off, and you always need to snooze it a few times before finally getting out of bed? Or do you feel that, even if you wake up on the first try, your day only truly begins after a cup of coffee? Or maybe you find it hard to stay focused and concentrated throughout the day, so you need caffeine to give you that extra boost. If you answered yes to any of these situations, or even more than one, I have news for you. These are classic signs that you're not getting enough sleep. But if that's the case, don't feel bad because you're not alone. 2 out of every 3 people in developed countries sleep less than the recommended 8 hours per day. And much more than just needing coffee or feeling distracted during the day, not getting enough sleep can be one of the main factors in diseases you definitely don't want, and could even be causing you to gain weight. But if you watch this video until the end, you'll not only learn fascinating things about the science of sleep, but you'll also learn how to sleep better. Which, let's be honest, we all need. So like the video and get comfortable because we need to talk about a few things. But first, besides sleep being very important, it also helps you be more efficient when studying and learning new things. And if you want to learn new things, I recommend FIAP. Applications for the 2025 entrance exams are now open, and they've created 5 pages covering topics like dev, robotics, and even cybersecurity to answer your questions. On these pages, you can find more information about FIAP's undergraduate courses, and by filling out the form, you'll receive an ebook with more details about the job market and career areas in each field. Don't forget to study well and sleep right to absorb knowledge. Now, let's get back to the video and explain why sleep is not a waste of time. Sleep seems like a waste of time. It's an average of 8 hours of our day where we're completely vulnerable. And it's scary to think that we'll spend a third of our lives unconscious. But sleeping isn't a waste of time. Fascinating things happen in your brain while you sleep. If we placed electrodes on your head to record a night of sleep, by the end, we'd have something similar to this graph. Simply put, what this graph represents is your brain activity during sleep, which rises and falls in cycles that last about 90 minutes. Each cycle is made up of stages called REM sleep and non-REM sleep. Both are important. And contrary to popular belief, one is not better than the other. They have different functions. Let's take memory as an example. It's during periods of low brain activity in non-REM sleep, which can be subdivided into 3 other phases, that our brain consolidates fact-based memories. If you still remember that Avogadro's constant is 6 times 10^23, or that this object is called a fidget spinner, think non-REM sleep. But if I give you a guitar or any other instrument, and you can play it even after years, think the other sleep stage, REM sleep. It's during REM sleep, the most active phase, that our brain consolidates memories involved in motor skills, like playing instruments or riding a bike. And here we can discuss one of the first problems caused by not getting enough sleep. Have you ever felt like you had difficulty learning or retaining new information? Especially during a time in your life when you didn't sleep much, like high school or college? One of the most important functions of sleep is memory consolidation. While we're awake, we're constantly absorbing new information. Most of it we don't need to remember later. But some things are important, like Avogadro's constant when you were a student. This type of memory is temporarily stored in the brain in a region called the hippocampus. It's like a flash drive in that it has limited storage space, and because of that, it fills up quickly. While you sleep, the brain works overtime to transform important memories stored in the hippocampus into long-term memories. But besides serving to establish long-lasting memories, sleep is also responsible for clearing the hippocampus, freeing up temporary storage space for new memorization opportunities. Various studies conducted with students show the importance of sleep both the night before and the night after learning. Students who slept well and in sufficient quantities the night before arrived at class with a greater capacity to learn new information. And students who slept enough after a day of lessons were able to consolidate memories like important dates or Avogadro's number. Still, it's very common for students not to get the recommended hours of sleep per night, which directly impacts learning. And I know at this point, you might be thinking this is due to a lack of responsibility or something like that, and that might be true if we were talking about a few individuals. But when 2/3 of students interviewed in a study report not being able to sleep the recommended hours per night, it's clear the problem goes beyond individual responsibility and commitment. This is what led some schools in the United States to experiment with starting classes later, which improved students' academic performance. The time students went to bed didn't change, but the time they woke up did. And by getting more sleep in the morning, their engagement with studies improved in various ways. Here, I need to make a personal note. When I was in high school, my classes started around 7 a.m., and I remember how horrible that time was for me, since I've always been more of a night owl. In college, classes started later, and this coincided with the time I enjoyed learning the most and felt more connected to what I was studying. For those of you studying, let me know in the comments, what time do your classes start? And now I think it's time to dive into one of the most fascinating parts of this video. Why are people sleeping less? The official recommendation for hours of sleep varies with age. It's recommended that children sleep between 9 to 12 hours per day, while teenagers need between 8 and 10 hours. For adults, the recommendation is 7 hours or more, and this varies from person to person. As I mentioned earlier, several studies conducted in different countries show that around 2/3 of people in industrialized nations sleep less than the recommended hours per day. But why? One reason is how today's world differs from the world in which humans, and consequently sleep, evolved. Every human experiences daily activity fluctuations that occur over 24 hours. This is known as the circadian rhythm and represented by body temperature. It looks something like this. Our activity is lower at night, which makes sense when thinking about our history. Humans are not nocturnal animals. Our eyes and senses didn't evolve to hunt or perform activities at night, so it makes sense that we take advantage of daylight hours to carry out our activities, which, until a few centuries ago, involved ensuring our basic survival needs were met. When the sun begins to set, our bodies start producing melatonin, which works as a sort of signal to sleep. Melatonin levels in the body rise as it gets darker, peak around the middle of the night, and then decrease as the night ends. The problem is that we now live surrounded by artificial lighting, which affects melatonin levels. Instead of starting to receive sleep signals as the sun sets, we turn on the house lights or stay glued to illuminated screens. And speaking of screens, many people blame blue light from screens for lack of sleep, but much research still needs to be done on this. There seems to be a connection between blue light and reduced melatonin levels, and consequently, lack of sleep. But it's not the only culprit. Surely your favorite device has some sort of night mode that reduces blue light from the images it produces. The result is a warmer, yellower image, and some phones and computers even do this automatically for you nowadays. But if this solved the problem, I probably wouldn't be making this video. It turns out the content you consume is almost as important as whether or not your screen emits blue light. It's different to read a book on a screen before bed than it is to play Dota with your friends. Maybe that's a warning for myself. Besides the artificial light from the screen, there's also the stimulation that comes from the content itself. In general, if you want to sleep better, it's best to avoid screens and artificial lighting in the hours before bed. But if you choose to use something with a screen, at least try to pick relaxing content. Another factor that impacts sleep for many people is the consumption of a very delicious stimulant, caffeine. Caffeine works because its chemical structure is very similar to that of another important molecule, adenosine. Throughout the day, adenosine builds up in our brains and binds to specific receptors. It's responsible for sleep pressure. Think of the amount of adenosine in your brain as a kind of timer, marking how much time has passed since you woke up. When enough adenosine has built up in the brain, you'll feel sleepy. Caffeine takes adenosine's place in the receptors, and as a result, you no longer feel sleep pressure. That's why drinking coffee when you're already tired doesn't help much, because that means your brain is already full of adenosine molecules in the receptors. Caffeine has a half-life of about 5 hours, so if you drink a cup of coffee after dinner at 8 p.m., 50% of it will still be in your body by 1 a.m. That's why drinking large amounts of coffee or too close to bedtime can cause insomnia. And even if you manage to sleep, it can interfere with the quality of your sleep. But with so many things negatively affecting our ability to sleep, doesn't it seem almost impossible to get good sleep? Don't worry, it's easier than it seems. If you want to sleep better, there are science-based best practices that together make up what is called sleep hygiene. I'll start with things you can do during the day. The first thing, which will not only help you sleep better, but also improve your overall quality of life, is exercise. It could be running, walking, going to the gym, swimming, or playing badminton. The important thing is to find a physical activity that fits into your routine and that you can do regularly. The second thing you can do is get sunlight or stay in naturally lit environments whenever possible. Natural lighting helps regulate your circadian rhythm and melatonin release, making it easier to fall asleep at night. And what about things you can do at night? The first is to try to limit artificial lights. If you get home from work at night, try not to turn on all the lights in your house. If you have a smart bulb, you can even dim the light to make it warmer and lower intensity. But ideally, it's better to leave it off. In the hours before bed, try to avoid screens. Set a cutoff time for screen use and stick to this rule. When that time comes, read a book or do things that don't involve screens like, I don't know, preparing the things you'll need to take with you when you leave the house the next day. Or pet your dog, cat, or other pet. Or write a poem about how the thermal death of the universe is coming and how we can't escape it. It's also important to avoid lying in bed unless it's bedtime. This helps condition you to associate lying in bed with sleep. In fact, something that works for me and others is, if I can't fall asleep after 20 minutes, I get up, leave the bed, and read a book in a dim environment until sleep comes again. If possible, close the curtains to make your room as dark as possible, and also close windows and doors to make the room quiet. As you find it easier to sleep, it's also important to keep your wake-up time consistent between weekdays and weekends. Waking up at 6 a.m. for work on weekdays and sleeping in until noon on weekends makes it much harder to organize and maintain a sleep routine. And most importantly, understand that every human is different, and things that work for one person might not work for you. It's important to experiment and test what works and what doesn't. It's equally important to be self-aware, and if insomnia persists or continues to appear, or if, even after sleeping the appropriate hours, you still feel tired, seek professional medical help. Sleeping is one of the best things you can do for your health, both in the short and long term. And I think it's really sad that society today seems to glorify lack of sleep. There's no shortage of examples of people bragging about pulling an all-nighter working or studying, as if that proves they're more dedicated than others. Dedication has absolutely nothing to do with how much sleep you sacrifice. Dedication is about what you do while you're awake. And I'd love to know the tactics you use to sleep better or more easily. Write to us in the comments. Maybe your experience will help someone.